Welcome, everybody. You are listening to In the Company of Charity podcast. It's your good friend, Sister Liz Schoberg here. And I'm with my good friend,
Sister Elizabeth. Hi, Sister Liz.
Oh, it's good to see you as always.
It's good to be with you as well.
Yes, this is going to be a great interview. It is probably the more interesting vocation stories that I've heard in quite some time. So Sister Belinda, who is a nun and also an archaeologist, and it really is just a fascinating experience to listen to her story, and that she is currently also doing archaeology as a sister, which I just love that.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is, you introduce her as a nun and an archaeologist. The fact is she was an archaeologist who found her vocation as a nun in a Benedictine monastery, and continues to be an archaeologist. And so I think that's the fascinating part of it. When I was listening to this, I was thinking, in the days when I first came to community and we were going to these inter-community novitiate programs, where you'd get together with other with novices and from other communities. And I can remember going to them, and not in any kind of judgmental way, at least I don't think so. I would look around, talk with people, hear about their vocation, why they entered the community they entered, and realize I'm not that. I know why I'm a daughter of charity. It's like you kind of integrate your identity a little bit more. And so listening to her, I was thinking, people could think, well, I have this career that seems incongruous to vocation, to religious life. Like, how does an archaeologist become a nun? How does a doctor become a sister? How do these things work? Am I going to have to give up something? And maybe you will. Maybe in some way there is a sacrifice. I mean, there's always sacrifice in religious life. We know that. Yeah, lots of joys and lots of wonderful things, but you are going to be sacrificing some things. And I think that she's a really good example of how God just wants the best for us. And if it means that she continues her work as an archaeologist, then he's going to find the place for her, that God will make that place, and that God's made that place for us, and that for those who feel called to religious life, if it is what God wants, and if that call is the right time, that God will make that space. And so I just enjoyed her. I thought she was delightful, and I just think people are going to really appreciate hearing her story.
Yeah, and I think a good takeaway, at least, and this is for sisters and for anybody, of there is no place where God is not.
That's a great point.
So
yeah,
in Armenia, digging in the dirt, God is there.
Yes.
And we find human connection and meaning and a sense of, with archaeology, human history, and the connectedness of all of us in these places. And so, yeah, good Christian doctors, good Christian social workers, and
that's right.
Archaeologists and all that good stuff. I just I love it. I love it. And that the idea that you do not have to give up your dreams or these parts of who you are when God calls you. And it's good. Sister Belinda is a great example of that. God using all of your gifts for his service.
Yeah, I think it was a great interview. I think we just go on to it. No more chatting here.
Yes,
I think your conversation with Sister Belinda was great. And it's just, sister and a nun chatting, one apostolic, one monastic. And it's still about, God's call and God's way of bringing us into the life he desired for us. So I think everyone's going to really enjoy it.
Well, we welcome everybody to our podcast episode, a very special episode we have with Sister Belinda Monahan. Welcome. We're very happy to have you.
I'm excited to be here.
Sister, can you tell us just a little bit overview about yourself, where you are, what you're doing, that sort of thing?
I'm Sister Belinda Monahan. I'm a Benedictine sister of Chicago. I entered the community in 2007 and took final vows in 2014. The Benedictine Sisters of Chicago is a community of 33 women located in Chicago. We are primarily a monastic community, so our main ministry is community, living the unity of all people in God. Those of us who are able to also work out of the monastery, and we choose our ministries based on our needs and talents and the needs of the world, as well as the needs of our community. So we try to balance those three things as we choose our ministries. Right now, I'm involved in a number of ministries. I work part-time at a parish as office staff, St. Peter Parish in Skokie, Illinois. I work part-time. I direct RCIA and companion some of the Catholic scholars at Northwestern's Catholic Campus Ministry. I also am the community vocation director. And last but not least, I do some archaeology.
Now, that is a lot of hats you have.
It is.
I'm sure you have plenty of time to just kick back and eat bonbons and just chill.
Oh, yeah.
Now, it is very common for people to hear sister stories, and it's kind of like, oh, I grew up, I went to high school, I majored in this thing in college, and it seems very kind of normal in a way, people's backgrounds. And then when they hear your background, I'm sure many people are quite surprised.
Yes, yeah, it's often a huge surprise to hear that somebody was an archaeologist and became a sister, and even more of a surprise to hear that I continue to be an archaeologist even when I am a sister.
And so what was the time between, okay, I was getting this PhD and doing this thing, and then the sisterliness just kind of swooped in and knocked you outside of it?
That is actually a great description. I always wanted to be an archaeologist. There's a story that is told in my family that when I was about 5 years old, my mother yelled out the back door, "Belinda, it's November. If you must play in the sandbox, at least come inside and put some shoes on." And so it was something I always wanted to do. I went to college, chose a college based on doing archaeology. I did my master's, my PhD, they were all related to archaeology. And it was, as I say, something that was just a part of me for my whole life. And I finished my PhD in 2000 and thought, well, now what? I did not immediately get a job teaching at a university. And I had said all along that I did not want to teach, but I didn't quite believe myself, and that seemed like the end goal. So I was kind of, I don't want to say floundering, but I was doing part-time work in research and part-time work teaching at Northwestern, and growing more and more dissatisfied with my archaeology piece of my life, but also getting more and more involved in the Shield Catholic Center at Northwestern. So as I did that, as I say, they were very gradual steps. I was asked to take over the bread baking ministry. I started spiritual direction. I started attending daily mass, and this happened over the course of several years. And at some point, I was sitting in Eucharistic adoration, and I hate to say that I heard voices, but the thought occurred to me, you need to think about becoming a sister. And I kind of looked around the room because I was pretty sure that the voice was addressed to somebody else. It could not possibly be
Can't be me. No.
No. It's Anne or Jane, and those are actual people. Like it feels like that's a pseudonym. Those are actual people. And I just kept thinking, it's got to be them. It's not me. But the more I talked to people, the more people said, oh, well, we thought you might be thinking about that. So while archaeology was a piece of my life the whole time, the sister thing was kind of a bolt out of the blue. And so I gradually started taking the first steps to enter religious life.
That's a very cool story. And you think that when people have these sort of different backgrounds, I mean, I'm thinking of these folks who are engineers and archaeologists and just things that maybe people don't automatically think translates into a life of consecration to God. How does that look with the community and with the possibility, can this be done within the community as a sister or not?
Well, I feel as though if it's a true vocation, God will find a way to make it work out. I have a friend who's a Benedictine who helps coach the football team at her college. So that's even more, I think, unusual than archaeology. In some ways, archaeology has been a great fit for community. Given that I'm looking at bones or ceramics that are 2,000 years old, they can wait while I go to prayer. There's a certain amount of, I do spend some time in the field, but I'm also home a lot more than a kind of a traditional 9-to-5 ministry allows me to be home. And so I think that we need to be open to where the Spirit calls us and recognize that I could not be an archaeologist in every single religious community. And that was one of the things that I asked when I was looking at communities. Can I continue to do archaeology? But because I firmly believe I was called to both, I was able to find a community that was open to it. Not at the beginning, I think, all excited about it, but at least open to the idea.
They're all like, yes, archaeology, do that.
And I'm not the first sister in my community to do archaeology. We had a sister who used to take high school students down to a high school field school in Southern Illinois. So
very, very cool. What's the coolest place you've been to, prior or since becoming a sister?
That is so hard to answer because each place that I have been has been cool in its own way. I've been working in Armenia for the past 18 years and watching that country go from a kind of a post-Soviet state where the question of whether we would have enough gas to get to the site every day remained open to now seeing like the huge supermarket in the town where I live that you can actually find on Google Maps. Is to me amazing. So watching a nation develop has been really exciting. I spent my spring semester of my senior year in Belize and discovered that I really do not like jungles.
Okay.
Too many creepy crawly things, and you gotta look under everything. And I'm much more fond of deserts. But I've really enjoyed almost all of the places I've been to do archaeology.
That's so cool. One of the things that I love about what archaeology is, and those things that in my mind you're studying the human being, and you're learning, and you're in my idea being a student of history.
Yes, yeah.
How does that translate for you with regard to our faith and the fact that we're just a little moment in this grand story of creation and of humanity?
Well, and I think it relates in several ways. The first is that archaeology is history, but it's often the history of the people who don't write history, whether it's prehistoric archaeology or just documenting the daily lives of people who don't make the history books. And so to a certain extent, it allows me to speak for the people who don't ordinarily have a voice. And it's on a different scale than we think of speaking for the poor or the disenfranchised in the world today. But I do think it's important to say these people lived lives that are different than ours, and here's how, and here's the dignity that they had, and here's why they're beloved children of God. And I think that's one important thing. I don't use that language when I do archaeological reports, but it's something that kind of, I think, resonates with me now more than it did before I entered community. And the second piece of it is this history piece. I did my dissertation on animal bones from the 7th millennium BC. So when I think about my life, it's so very, very brief. And we hear a lot today about religious life and how we're getting smaller and people are nervous about the future. Benedictines have been around for 1,500 years. And I think we have a future, and it will look different than it does now, but it looks different now than it did 40 years ago and 80 years ago and 100 years ago. And so I think having that historical background allows me to take the longer view of history and say, not that these things don't matter, but that we'll get through them and we'll come out looking different in the future, and that's okay.
You know, some people know this, but I was a biology major in undergrad. And I think one of the neat things about science people, I wouldn't claim that I'm a intellectual science person necessarily, but I think when you've studied those things, you can have a greater appreciation of God in his presence and his mastermind of all creation, because I can say, like, look at how the mind works, or look at how the body works from a biological perspective, and say, well, that it couldn't have just, come from nothing. We do, obviously the Big Bang Theory is out there, and that's a plausible explanation, but who started the Big Bang? You know what I'm saying? Like, whose wisdom created all of this to the least little blade of grass? And I think for me, that's the wonder and awe piece that I think science has to offer for people.
Right, and seeing the diversity of people's lives, and archaeology for me is so cool because I get to see it in the past, but also in the present. I've mentioned all of these places I've been, but I can't mention all of the people that I've met while I'm there. But seeing the diversity of people's lives, and how the phrase "the body of Christ" is one that I heard you use earlier. That we're all part of the body of Christ, and the body parts look different, but we are all part of the same thing, and I do find that amazing and wonderful and exciting.
Yeah, I would love to do a little more research on that connection between science and faith. And there's some pretty stellar quotes out there from different saints and people to talk about, gosh, like what a creator God we have.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And not only God who kind of creates, but who loves what he creates and is part of what he creates. And yeah, I find that incredibly lovely.
Now, do you find a specific kind of person that ends up in this field of archaeology, or is it kind of a mixed mash of people, and you maybe meet any kind of person who's an archaeologist?
It's a mixed bag of people. They're definitely, there's not a specific kind of archaeological type. I think we all think of Indiana Jones. I've never known anybody to do like virtually any of that at an archaeological site. It'd be much more kind of
no snakes. Well, you said you were in the jungle.
Snakes, so. Yes, I've been at places where there are snakes, and I'm kind of with him on the snake attitude. But like the project I'm in Armenia right now, we take families with us. So this past summer we had a 3-year-old with us. Her brother's been with us in the past. So we're just people. We just are kind of called in different ways.
Now, when you're working with young women who are discerning, because that's one of your 1,000 hats that you have on, God bless you for that. Is there some hesitation on some people's parts because perhaps they've invested $100,000 in going to school for certain things, or they don't want to give up their professorship, or they struggle with the idea of integrating some of these things into a religious life?
I think yes. Certainly when I first felt called to religious life. I remember sitting in my spiritual director's office saying, I don't want to be a teacher or a nurse, so I can't be a sister, right? And after she stopped laughing at me and said it's no longer the 60s, I was able to kind of move forward. But I recently gave a presentation at a discernment group at Northwestern, and one of the young women who was there came up to me and said, I need to talk to you because I did not realize that I could continue to be an environmental scientist and be a sister. I did not know that that was possible. And so I was thinking about it as an either or. I've had people say that about being a doctor. Can I be a sister and a doctor? And I firmly believe that if God is calling you to both, then it will work out somehow.
Mm-hmm. And that piece about, okay, it's the big V vocation of, you know, what am I going to align myself with this person and commit myself to this person for the rest of my life and to be in that family setting versus I want to give my life as a priest, sister, brother, etc. You know, that's one piece of it. But then seeing how God uses those little V vocations, and I don't even know that I would say little V in your case. I mean, it's a big part of your experience.
It is, and I think of it as the big V vocation, the vocation that we all share, to love God and to be of service to God. And then we all have maybe even hundreds of little V vocations, who we live our lives out with, what we do, and that changes over time. My vocation at 17 may have been to be an archaeologist or to learn how to be an archaeologist, but it was not yet to be a sister. And that's so, like, my vocation has changed, and I think that's true of everybody. And I am doing far less archaeology now than I was even 8 years ago in community, because the community and God through the community has called me to all of these many other ministries that I mentioned earlier. Did I expect to be directing RCIA? No, but somebody asked me to do it, and it turns out that I do have the gifts that are necessary. And so I continue to do it. And so I think those vocations, if we think of them as multiple pieces and changing over time, it's a little bit less daunting to think about what they might be, because we can think about where we're being called daily rather than to sit and to get panicked about where is God calling me and I only have one call and I have to get it right, and kind of wait for that lightning bolt to strike.
Yeah, I think some people want the lightning bolts so that they can get some clarity, but it's not, doesn't always come that way, unfortunately.
It doesn't. And as somebody who has had the lightning bolt, although it was a lightning bolt for me, apparently everybody else knew before I did. It's deeply terrifying to get into. It's not like, oh yay, I can't wait to go do this. At least it wasn't for me. It was more like, really? You're sure that wasn't meant for somebody else? Mm-hmm. So there's that piece of it too that, like, we don't get when we read the story of Paul being knocked off his horse. He doesn't seem to recount the panic that goes with that.
Now, I wonder, when you're doing this archaeology stuff and going to where you're going and interacting with all of these other people, do people express any kind of intrigue or interest in the fact that you're a sister and an archaeologist? I'm thinking, like, we've talked about what it's like for the person, but what is it like for those on the other end who are interacting with you as a sister in those arenas, which just seems so odd to have a nun hanging out, like digging in the dirt with you or whatever.
Sure enough. And the project that I'm working on right now, a lot of those people have known me since before I was a nun. And so the question kind of probably wasn't as gradual to them, but none of them seemed terribly shocked when I said, oh, by the way, I'm entering this religious community. And they have been amazingly supportive. Just because my schedule has changed and the demands on me are greater, and they have been, I'm stunned at how supportive and helpful they have been, and how willing to accommodate me. our landlady in Armenia knew me before I entered, and has spent much of the past 8 years trying to talk to me about religious life. The native tradition of religious life in Armenia has largely died out, and so she's very curious about how I live my life out daily and what I think about God and all of that. The big problem is I don't speak Armenian, and our Russian is sufficiently different. She has a very strong Caucasian accent, and so I don't understand her Russian, and she doesn't understand mine, and the vocabulary simply isn't there anyway.
Right.
So I can't have these deep conversations with her. So sometimes we manage a little bit through translation. But even this past summer, one of the graduate students who was there seemed to find what my daily life is like absolutely fascinating. She was Jewish, so she's not interested in joining a religious order, but we certainly spent quite a bit of time talking about our experience of faith and religion and how that all works together. And I had a lot of fun with these conversations, and I think she did too.
Yeah, I think the really cool thing about that is you're in whole different settings than what a regular sister, so to speak, is. When I go to work, everybody expects me to talk about Jesus and prayer and God and faith and, oh, sister, would you bless the meal, all that stuff. But when you're in these other settings, you have this interreligious dialogue. You have people asking questions that you never even thought of. And I think it gives us a greater appreciation of how big the world is. And we can't assume that our faith is this, white, American, very suburban thing, middle class, so to speak. We have to get out there and be exposed to people who are different from us. And I think that that's a cool gift that I think you have.
And it never occurred to me to think that I'm doing interreligious dialogue when I'm talking to Dukik or something. It's just I'm having a conversation with a friend about this topic. So yeah, and it works the other way too. The idea that I was just talking to somebody last night who's like, you still do archaeology and you're a sister. So it also broadens Catholics' ideas of what you can be and do as a sister.
That's really cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, and blessings on so many projects that you have in line. For those who don't know, we know each other because we worked on a little NRVC thing together, and that conference was a lot of fun. And I have a great appreciation for the things you guys and your team do with all of that. It is not easy work.
And I'm so grateful for the work that you did on that project. It turned out amazingly well, far exceeded my expectations. So, and you were a large part of that.
We just make it work. We just make it work. All right. Well, blessings, everybody. Thank you for listening, and we'll hear from you next time.
This has been In the Company of Charity podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.